Welcome. We're glad to have you here today, and this is a great time for us as we celebrate 100 years worth of transportation in Kentucky. As I look out across the crowd and as I saw several people coming in today, there are some folks that are very near and dear to me that not only are sitting on this stage, but are also sitting in the audience. As we were thinking about how to commemorate this first 100 years of transportation in Kentucky, a number of possibilities came to mind to us. And I wanted to do something that gave us an opportunity to reflect on who we are, our rich history and our rich heritage, and looking at who we are as the road builders and transportation providers in Kentucky. We're here today to celebrate a century of service and a legacy of leadership. And I think it's important that we think about it in that context. We may be a long way from those days of 25 employees or 15 employees and $25,000 annual budgets, but today the cabinet has about 4,500 employees, and we operate on an annual budget of about $2 billion. So it's a little bit different organization today. And as I've personally reflected on my own 37 years worth of association with the cabinet, and I did calculate that 37 years. I actually started as a scholarship recipient in 1975 on the scholarship program. So as I personally look back, I have many, many memories, many great stories. There's much that I appreciate. But the one thing that I have appreciated as much as anything are the incredible friendships that I've built through this cabinet and through this profession. Most of all, as I think about who I am, where I am in the organization at this point, and where I've been for many, many years, I am incredibly thankful that we in transportation are a family. And when I look at the folks on stage and those of you in the audience, it's like addressing family, and that's important to me. Where else could a kid from far western Kentucky who was going to community college and decided to drop an application in the mail for a transportation scholarship, where else could he be selected and then be able to attend the University of Kentucky and graduate and have a full-time job waiting for him when he got out of school? That was pretty cool. Where else could a kid like that, while he was going to school, work during the summers and get paid to do such cool stuff? I got to serve a couple of summers on the construction of the I-24 Tennessee River and Cumberland River bridges. And long ago history for sure, but at that time we were actually setting piers by freezing ground and excavating mud and rock one shovel at a time until we could get down to real rock. And so you'd have 100-degree temperatures outside in the middle of the summer and ice all over everything as we were freezing the ground. Just incredible stuff to see as a young man. Where else could you cut your teeth on rural highway planning and as a 26-year-old kid be given the opportunity to determine the location of the AA highway between Maysville and Ashland? And as it turned out, we actually built two legs of that project. We built the leg to the Greenup Dam from Maysville, and we built the leg that goes to Grayson. And so that was an exciting thing to be part of early on. Where else could you do 50 rural planning studies and calibrate 15 small urban area studies, be the cabinet's liaison for planning in Louisville and Lexington, and all of that before the age of 30? Where else could you do those things? Where could you turn programming into program management and in 1989 redefine the 6-year highway plan process to a point that essentially continues at today? Where else could you find yourself face-to-face with the governor of the Commonwealth, explaining transportation and planning and all of those issues, and then helping him for several years work through his programs and things that he wanted to do? Where else could you be involved closely in organizational change? Mac Yell, someone else I saw that wasn't on my list. Mac is here. Mac and I went round and round with organizational change and many issues 10 or 15 years ago. And we built some great stuff. And then as we moved forward, we took that and we've slowly molded it into some other things that are adapting even more into the culture that we have today. Where else could you serve as an assistant to the state highway engineer, a deputy state highway engineer, state highway engineer, chief of staff, and even secretary, all in one career. It's been incredible to think about. Like I said, I personally am incredibly grateful to the Transportation Cabinet for the opportunities it has afforded me. But most of all, I appreciate the most important gift, and that gift is working with and serving some of the brightest, most talented people in the transportation business right here in Kentucky. Our greatest heritage is truly those cabinet employees and leaders that blazed the trail before us. And we're very, very, very fortunate to have several of those with us today. Some of my favorite bosses, mentors, and friends are here today to share with you some of their thoughts and memories about who we've been and what we've been and how we've been in years past as the Transportation Cabinet and the Department of Highways. Our panel today has more than 150 years worth of transportation experience, and I may be kind. I'm not sure. I may be kind. And but many, many, many of those years were either at the helm of this organization or were darn close to it. And I couldn't be more thrilled to have them here with us today. First of all, it's my great pleasure to have with us someone who was recognized as Dr. Change. He's also known as Mr. Calvin Grayson, who served as our Secretary of Transportation from 1977 to 1980. Calvin, if you wouldn't mind, just raise your hand and let them know you're here. Most of us know you. Next, we're glad to have Mr. Don Kelly, who served as Secretary of Transportation from 1992 through 1995, or in that range. And Don is sincerely, he's one of the smartest and kindest men I've ever been around. He was a great mentor to me. I saw him get mad once. You may have been almost mad, but I was pretty close. But welcome, Don, please. We're also fortunate to have with us Mr. Glenn Kelly, who was Mr. Pre-Construction in the cabinet for many, many years. That's what I always call him. Glenn has many, many, many fond memories of activities in this cabinet and the things that he did. I know that working hand in hand with then Secretary Milo Bryant was probably one of the greatest challenges that one could have imagined. And Glenn, I don't know that we're keeping the medians between here and Louisville so smooth that you could hit a 3-wood off them, but I know that was his goal at the time. That was Milo's goal. But Glenn did a great job at leading our cabinet through some very difficult times then. So let's give a hand to Glenn. And then I've saved to last, and certainly not least, a fellow who's very important to me, a fellow that I had the opportunity to work hand in hand with Governor Paul Patton on many opportunities, and he and I both had some very memorable experiences through that. Former Secretary Jim Codell is with us today. He was Secretary from 1996 through 2003. So let's please welcome Jim. All right, I'm gonna do something here in just a second. We're gonna have just a panel discussion. And what I'd like to do is keep it very informal. I've encouraged them, let's just have fun with this. So as we go through, I'm going to be asking a few questions, and then, gentlemen, I'd love for you all just share thoughts and experiences, and we'll go until the time expires. Somebody will give us the time to shut it down. But I'm very excited about this, and I hope all of you will enjoy this. I have a few questions that I thought it might be good for us just to ponder and to give your thoughts to, but is there for each of you, and I'll just start on this end, we can work down the road, but Calvin, would you mind to tell us about your experience with the cabinet, and is there one particular experience maybe that stands out for you?
Seems like I was blessed probably more than anyone else could be, having spent 30 years with the Highway Department and the Transportation Department. I guess I was blessed because it seemed like I was there when everything was changed and was happy to be there. I guess the Appalachian Development Highway System was probably the most significant thing in my lifespan because John Wisman and Bert Combs, I give credit for the establishment of that federal legislation. And it was something that I think seemed like it was just the right time to be, because President Kennedy was going to sign the bill, and he was assassinated. And we just gave up because it was a kind of legislation that nobody expected to pass or get the president to sign. But Lyndon Johnson did muscle it through, and it was changed, and I was named by Commissioner Ward as the Appalachian Desk. Really the most inanimate title I ever had, you know. Just sign a letter, the Appalachian Desk, was not very human. But I would say that being a part of that program, and then getting the 1,400 miles, or 400 some miles rather, in Kentucky on the Appalachian Development Highway System. There's one thing I'll share with you. We used the Mountain Parkway. It seemed like everything in Kentucky was happening that way. We used the Eisenhower just came with the Interstate Defense System of Highways. If he hadn't put defense in the title, he probably would not have got it passed. But when he put defense with it, we looked for a title in the Appalachian Development Highway System, and the term development came up because we used the Mountain Parkway, which had just been opened in 1962. Appalachian Bill passed in 1965. And the traffic engineers always had an expansion factor, but we could never find out what caused the extra traffic that came along. We call that the developmental factor. And so that's how we tagged the Appalachian Development Highway System. That is still in existence today, and I just was really grateful to be a part of its initiation, and we'll always remember it.
Thank you. And I have to ask, this is just a personal thing, but is the legend true? My understanding is that you and John Wissman sat in a restaurant in Powell County and drew the Appalachian Highway System in Kentucky on the back of a napkin.
John Wissman was the most creative person I've known, and my life's been blessed because I knew him. He could never do anything on schedule, but he was creative, and I don't think it was on the back of a napkin. I thought it was a menu, really. Really. But John Wissman was honored, and one of the few people who was honored by having his memory honored in the rotunda in the Capitol. Most people don't know John Wissman. It was a real blessing to know him.
Thank you. And I had to ask that question. 10 years ago, a fellow started building a house at the foot of the hill on the road in which I live. And an older fella, and he was out there doing a lot of the work himself, and the house and the design were quite unusual. And I stopped by to talk about it one day with him just to have a conversation. And that gentleman was none other than John Wissman. And you talk about feeling like I'd found a treasure trove, to be able to have that conversation within a block of my house. And so he told me numerous stories about the fellow sitting next to me, but I won't go there. We'll be all right. Don, in your tenure as Transportation Secretary, I know we had a lot of interesting things going in your time. Is there anything in particular that stands out?
Yeah, I guess the thing that stands out the most, Mike, is that probably something that everybody else would regard as a negative, but we had that huge snowstorm that literally shut down the state of Kentucky for 4 days. And I think all of us caught more grief over that than anything that ever happened in the history of the Commonwealth. But it also created a need that we didn't even know existed to be prepared in the future for something that just totally nobody expected, and nobody probably will ever expect again, but you have to be prepared for it. And it's cost the state no telling how many millions of dollars since then to be prepared for something that you know, was very unfortunate. But it was kind of an exciting time for us because we came together, and I'm looking at Macchiel back there, you know, there were periods of time during that week when he and I were the only two people in the state office building answering the phones, and some guy called and said that he'd like to help out, clear the roads. And Max said, "What do you have?" And he said, "Well," said, "I've got a little backhoe and a trailer and a truck." And Max said, "Well, I appreciate you calling, but we've already cleaned our sidewalks." And so, you know, that's, I guess, one of the few pleasant memories of that week. But that was an interesting time. The other thing, I guess, was the preparation that I had to be secretary. That Cal Grayson, for some reason unknown probably to anybody here and me as well, picked me over a bunch of folks to come over and be his assistant. And I was a pretty young and green engineer at that time. But I was thrown in with some giants of the transportation cabinet. There was a lot of, and people don't remember them by name or anything else, but really, really brilliant engineers. John Witt's sitting here. I can tell you some great stories about John Witt. Amen. But Guy Van Sant, who again was one of those people who could never get anything done on time, but whenever I first went over to the 10th floor, he was doing some work there on a bridge that was going to be taken down and replaced up in northern Kentucky. And he'd done a decision tree, which he rolled out on a table there that must have been 12 feet long. And I stood there, he explained it to me, and I looked at that and looked at that, and I thought, you know, I understand everything he just told me, but there's no way in the world I could have done that myself. And, you know, they're just folks like that, and you know, just a period of growing up with guys like that was wonderful. And that was probably the, you know, a true testament to what happened later in my life.
Well, there's a copy of a book on the table up here. You can't see it, but the name of the book is Big Roads. And when we think about big roads in the interstate system and the caliber of people it took to build those roads all across the country, and certainly right here in Kentucky we're no different. And I know that there are many folks in this audience today that I have interacted with personally on many occasions, and you've probably left me thinking that guy's a workaholic. There's something strange about him. He's always dialed into this or that. You know, this is how I grew up, folks. I mean, this was the expectation. And one of the things about today that I find a little bit disturbing, I see it ebbing a bit as we go forward. But back in our day, there was no sense of entitlement. You were expected to uphold your end of the bargain and get your share of the work done. And by golly, we did. And so I really appreciate and understand fully those comments, Don. It's terrific. And as far as the snowstorm, you will love to know this. Governor Beshear, when he was first elected, his very first day in office, he called Joe Prather. And he said to Joe, he said, I don't care what you do, just make sure the roads stay clean in the winter. He said, you make sure you're prepared today. So long-lasting effect of that. All right, Jim, I know there were lots of things you could talk about. So.
Before I started to my yarns and follow, because I have to spin a yarn or two to follow these two clowns that preceded me, or three. But let me start by paying tribute to the guy that I think was the most qualified and the best man to ever occupy the seat, and he's sitting right here. His name's Calvin Grayson. He is a jewel, and Hancock was talking about running into that jewel out there when he built that house. Let me tell you something, folks. This is a jewel right here, and you need to recognize that. Smartest guy that I ever known. And in fact, he left the transportation cabinet, created a position for him, and the Kentucky Transportation Center in Lexington. So he did a great job. But beyond that, I was talking to a fellow a couple of weeks ago who actually was former Deputy Secretary of the Cabinet. And I said, well, you ought to go down there with me. And he said, why are you going down there? And I said, well, I was the secretary for almost 8 years. He said, wait just a minute, you were acting, I was the secretary. That's Paul Patton, and he was deputy secretary at one time. And he said, I said, well, Mac and I used to call you the chief engineer. That's right. And I said, he said, well, you just thought you were the secretary. I said, you were just acting. He said, you know what acting title means? He said, we used to do that thing across the cabinet now and then. But it was a good ride. It was a ride that I enjoyed, and you know, you could talk about, as you might expect, US 119, US 460 in Pike County that Hancock and I were, and Mac and others were intimately involved. And we can talk about Charlie Raymer and introducing me to Jeff Jasper. I'll never forget. He says, come downstairs, I want you to meet the smartest guy in the cabinet. We were having all these headaches down on US 27, and we were 6-laning and with permitted U-turns at the lights. And the natives were up in scatters down there. I mean, they were riding us. So I go down there and introduce to Jeff Jasper, and he had it all, the traffic modeling all set up. But it was a good ride, and you know, whether we were down in Louisville with the get in, get out, and stay out on the I-64 through the Cochran Hill and the 65 down next to the river, or the Brent Spence, or the Maysville Bridge, or 6880 down in the west. But all in all, it was a great ride.
Excellent. Well, I know we spent a lot of long, anxious nights preparing road plans over that 8 years. And do you remember the night that we were in Patton's office and his assistant had told us lunch was in the refrigerator, or dinner was in the refrigerator? And about 1 o'clock in the morning, Patton looked at us and said, "Oh, I forgot to say that lunch or dinner was in the refrigerator." But we, those were times that were tremendous for all of us. And I think you and I both carry a lot of great memories from those. Glenn, how about you? I know there were lots of issues with Secretary Bryant. You were put in the middle of delivering projects that were thought of one day and expected to be on the ground the next. So,
yeah. If it ain't snowing, you best be mowing. I believe that was the motto at the time. I've never been ever to really relate to what the fifth member of the Celtics felt like being on the same floor with Rondo and Alice and Pierce and Garnett, but that's kind of how I feel this morning, being on the same floor with these stars. These are the four real stars in transportation, and particularly Calvin. If I ever grow up, it's Calvin who I want to grow up to be.
Have you been drinking?
No, that's Calvin, and that's not the first time I've said that. The first time I've said that in your presence. That's a fact for many of us in the industry. In thinking back about the various projects that we've been involved with, the programs that we have been involved with, all of them are the product, as Secretary prefaced his comments on, are a result of you and the others in the transportation cabinet. Mike, still Secretary Hancock, made a little speech a couple of years ago, and was talking about, he really hit the nail on the head that on DNA. Those of you, Russ Romine was born with the DNA to work for the transportation cabinet and make things better for the people of Kentucky, and that's the real deal for all you guys, whether it be Kirsten Jaggers or Greg Meredith or all the other people that I see in the audience. That passion is probably more memorable in the projects. I can go back to a project had the opportunity, because of a road system, Toyota Motors came to this state. Jim Codell was one of the people that built the first road on it. About 6 months, I believe, that you built that road, and it was because of you people, the people of Kentucky. There's 7,000 jobs at Toyota and 25,000 spinoff jobs in the state today. There are more people employed directly or indirectly by Toyota than there are in state government. And that's not a result of Glenn Kelly. It's a result of Glenn Kelly having the opportunity to work with you all and the passionate people and throughout our organization to do what needed to be done for the state of Kentucky.
I appreciate that, Glenn, and I will share with you all that the speech that Glenn's talking about, I was at the partnering conference a couple of years ago, and I had just jotted down some notes the night before, and it just so happened that the very week before, I had John Witt and Jim Gray and I think Kathleen, and who else was with you? I think there were 3 or 4 that came over just to visit our new building here, and we put on the dog for them. I mean, we took them out, we gave them a great tour and showed them what this building was all about, and in that time, for me, it was an absolute delight because I was being responsive to people who blazed the trail for me, and so it's always great to look over your shoulder and remember where you came from, and guys like John are where I came from. And so that I was just making that point in a speech and talking about the DNA in our cabinet, the people who grow up and whose sons and daughters then come to work for us here, and how much of a family it is. And when that was over, when that talk was over and things were breaking up, Glenn came over and his hand out and a tear in his eye, and I said, "Oh my, I hit a nerve." And Glenn, I really, really, really appreciate you and all you've meant to the cabinet. So it's terrific. These folks all have had tremendous accomplishments. Jim, I look back at Earth Shoes Mateel and some of the things that you got into with the environment, and And, I know Glenn had to muscle a lot of projects through as he was trying to push them for Milo. You were trying to figure out, how do I get the feds and others into the game with us in a better way? Can you describe a little bit of that? And
I said, I didn't really realize that you were an environmentalist at heart, but I'll never forget Earthshoes and I decided we were going to take our show on the road. We'd been running around the cabinet here, and Cheryl finally convinced us that we need to go on the road. So I believe we were in Pikeville, and one of the Dammers may remember this, but so we're up there, and so I get up and pop my gum for 15, 20 minutes, and then I let Earthshoes get up, and he gets up and tells everybody how we're turning green and all this and that. So he opens the floor for questions, and he gets the type of questions you might expect. And finally, some fella stood up and said, Director Mateel, or whatever his title was, or I forgot what we called him, among other things, but said, Director Mateel, let me ask a question. Said, when did you all get on, when did the cabinet decide to get on this environmental kick? Mateel didn't miss a lick. He turned around and he said, he pointed at me, he said, when that guy there let me out of the closet. But it was fun, and I will reiterate what Secretary Hancock said a while ago. That was one of the first, I started to say charges, orders that Paul Patton gave me. He said, I want you to understand one thing. I was the lieutenant governor when the roads were closed, and he says, get the salt and get it in stockpiles, because we're not going to be closing any roads. That's plain language is easy to understand. Thank you.
It's interesting, as we moved forward several years ago, and all the changes that the big snow brought to our state. One of the champions in the legislature for making the appropriate moves was a guy named Pete Worthington, and Don, I know you remember him well. One of the first meetings that I had with Governor Patton's then brand new Transportation Secretary Fred Mudge with the General Assembly, or a member of the General Assembly, was with Pete Worthington, and we talked about how to make all those things work, and that was still very fresh in his mind. Don, as you worked through that, and as you worked through, I know, a number of other issues, you were close to the governor and worked with him quite closely to make good things happen for our state. How would you want a few words about maybe your relationship with Governor Jones and how that all played out?
I had never met Brereton Jones. I had been in California for 3 years and came back to Kentucky to work with Cal Grayson at the Transportation Center, and got a call from some friends and said, the new governor doesn't have a transportation secretary. Are you interested? I said, he doesn't know me. I don't know him. I haven't, I'll be glad to meet with him and see what happens. Well, needless to say, a month later, I was transportation secretary. And what I found with Governor Jones was he was interested in a lot of things. Transportation was not necessarily one of them. And as a result, there was a lot of mutual trust between the two of us that when he wanted something done, and a lot of times he would call me and say, I really need for you to do this. And if I could do it, I'd say, don't worry about it. If I couldn't, I'd say, Governor, let me tell you why you don't want to do that. And he'd always said, you do what's right. And I had 4 years of somebody supporting me and saying, you do what's right. And that made the snowstorm a lot easier. The interesting thing about the snowstorm, if you go back and read about it, it was one of those unique things when the weather just completely hit Kentucky, didn't do anything to the states north of us, the states south of us, but it came across on the parkways and the interstates. It just completely annihilated us. And it started off, the temperatures were above freezing, and it started raining, and then it started dropping. And the next thing we knew, we had a layer of ice and then a layer of snow on top of it. The temperature dropped down below 20 below zero and stayed there for 4 days. And I'm not sure that even under the preparation we have now that we could handle anything like that. I guess you just pray a lot and hope it doesn't happen again. But I had a governor who trusted me and whom I trusted, and he never asked me to do anything I couldn't do ethically, which was good. You can't say that of all of them. There have been some that haven't been true.
Thank you. And Calvin, as you interacted with Governor Carroll, I know there were a number of interesting times. Anything in particular that comes to mind that you think we might appreciate or find humorous?
I don't think there's any governor we've had that knew more about the finances in state government than Julian Carroll. And the number of nights over in the mansion, he with a blackboard and a chalk in his hand, wanting to know where every penny went. And I think still today he's one of the few people that even today in the legislature knows about the finances in the state. I got a little feud with Don Kelly here talking about the bad winter he had. I didn't think his winter was so bad. I had the worst winter. If you all recall, it's the first time in our lifetime that the Ohio River froze solid. You could drive a car across it. It didn't freeze that much when it, the bad snowstorm he talked about. And we didn't have any salt. And the governor was kind of disturbed about the fact that we couldn't do anything because we couldn't get any salt down the river. And so I said, but you know, there's always the good side of everything. He said, what's good about this? I said, the bridges are happy. He said, what do you mean the bridges are happy? I said, we ran out of salt. Can't put salt on the slab. They're going to last longer. He went around the state telling people, said the bridges are happy, but he said, I'm more interested in the people that vote. So it's been a kind of a thing. I said, my winter's as bad as yours, Don. But I just want to say that my 30 years with state government and highway department, and was just happened to be there when everything was just changing for the right way, I thought. And the reason I guess it was so good to me was that having that long a time to work with people, and one in particular back here, Ivan Childers. When I was here many years ago, Ivan was the indispensable man. He's still here. But it's people like Ivan and everyone in this room and all the other people I was blessed to work with, I've always had a saying that I really believe that friends are one of God's blessings. And I think we have been blessed in the Transportation Highway Department with those kind of people that cared. And so I'm just happy to have been a part of it.
Awesome. I want to give each of you one more opportunity, and there's something down at this end of the group here. There's a fellow who officially did you get a doctorate of change, or are you just known as Dr. Change?
Oh, that was probably one. When you live a long time, you get a lot of awards just for being old.
But
my daughter said, Dad, you don't say getting old, you say getting older. Yes. It was the award from the federal DOT.
Well, I was curious about change, and for each of you, as I look back, I can see numerous things that I've seen change, and if I don't know if you want to take just a moment or two and think about things you've actually seen change.
Well, I was given the first computer in 1956, and things changed. Had two engineers given, Charlie Brown and Bruce Urban. They didn't care anything about programming the environment. They wanted to know how it worked. And they spent all their time trying to figure out how the IBM 650 worked. And that was the beginning of the change, and that was the same year that the interstate passed, so 1956. That was a memorable year for, I think, our department. And so the federal government's award that gave me a Doctor of Change really worked out well. When I went to University of Kentucky, I told the dean, I like my doctor's degree better than yours.
That's right. Don, any thoughts about change, just in general, as far as it relates to transportation?
Yeah, you look back on, your career and things that happened before you got there and things that happened while you were there and things since. And it's been a steady evolution of improvement. I don't think there's any question about that.
Amen.
And which is fortunate. One of the things that we did while I was there was we did the first complete mission statement for the Transportation Cabinet that had ever been done. And we put a lot of effort and energy into it. And I know before you moved over here, back in the old building, I can remember walking through there and still seeing that on the walls,
Yes.
6-8 years later, which told me that what we did was probably the right thing to do. And I think it made people more aware, more conscious of what their responsibilities were, and made it a better cabinet.
Thank you. Jim?
I think it's incumbent upon all of us to recognize and realize young people in this cabinet, I mean, they can do, and I've said this 100 times, more accidentally than we could do on purpose. I'll never forget, Raymer's leaving. And somebody comes in my office and says, well, what are we going to do? Charlie's leaving. He's going to retire and he's going to go to work for a consultant. And I said, look, we have this fabulous scholarship program. That's really, that is our, it has been our existence. So there isn't any question about it. I said, look, we've got all these smart young people in here. Yeah, Charlie's retiring. I love Charlie, and I have the utmost respect for him. But it's time to get one of these young folks off the bench, let them shoot the three-point shot. It'll go in occasionally. As I said, they can do more accidentally than they can do on purpose. And a good analogy is the basketball analogy. You take Oscar Robertson and Jerry West and compare them to Kevin Durant and LeBron. I rest my case. But it is. But one thing I had, one good fortune I had, and all the panelists, with the exception of the current secretary, had going for us was money. I'm telling you, Mike Hancock is leading this cabinet through some pretty difficult times.
Amen.
I mean, it's tough out there. It is really tough. And you know, the Republicans even like me. They liked me when I was there because, heck, we had money we could do. But I had one good fortune that none of these fellows had. Not misfortune, good fortune. And I worked for a governor who was an engineer. And I could take a set of plans over there. In 10 minutes, he knew more about them than I did, which wasn't really a feat. But he understood what was going on. And he understood when you need to tell people no. Case in point, he asked me, we were over there one day, and he said, when you go into this such and such a district? And I said, well, I really need to go down there. And he said, well, I want you to meet with this fellow that's a member of the First Family, as I'll call it. He was a contributor. And said, this fellow wants a favor. I'm not going to go any further with it. You know, he wanted a median crossover, is what it was. So I get him, and I go down and meet the district engineer and get the fellow in the car, and we drive down there and look at it. And it might have been 150 feet from a bridge on a 4-lane road. And he wanted a median crossover. And I said, well, this isn't going to happen. And he said, well, what will the governor say? And I said, well, he'd probably say what he wants to say. And I said, but he's going to hear this from me. So the next morning, I go to the governor's office. I said, I've been looked, seen it, and I reiterated what I just told you all. He turned around his credenza, picked the phone up and dialed the guy. He said, hey, Joe, his name wasn't Joe, Codell's in here with me, and you're going to have to think of something else you want because we cannot do that. It was a good fortune that I had to work for an engineer. And while he might have cut Hancock and me out of dinner a night or two over there when we were burning the midnight oil trying to get the 6-year plan together, all in all, it was a good ride. And it was a good ride because of all of you all again, and thank you.
You bet. Thank you. Glenn, change, I know in your world, has been constant. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'd like to share just a couple paragraphs very quickly here. Over the past 50 years of growth and use of automobile and increased highway construction, the citizens of Kentucky, in the absence of good information on where it will all lead, have made remarkable inventive choices about the relationship between highway transportation and how Kentucky's land would be used. Thus, neither the engineers in Frankfort, the those in your district offices can build today even a simple road, much less a multi-lane interstate highway, and not be aware that one must fell trees, lower the hills, bridge the rivers, if there's to be a road at all. So for years, these experts have sought to soften the impacts, experimenting with planning techniques, contriving construction methods that will allow Kentuckians to have their land and use it too. And with those paragraphs, there was just statements made that the key fundamentals for project implementation were to identify the social, economic, and environmental impacts, employ an interdisciplinary approach, involve the citizens, and to consider alternatives. This is an excerpt from a 1973 document that was written by Guy Van Sant.
Wow.
That's So what I was trying to say with that is, yes, there's been lots of changes in technology, but I don't know that we haven't adapted more than what we've changed over the years. Thank you.
That's excellent. Thank you. And that, yes, sir, you sure can.
Secretary Hancock made reference to Jim Gray, who was planning, and of course most of you know he's in a wheelchair now, but one of the things that made my life as secretary easy was that Jim Gray was former secretary and went from there to being secretary of the cabinet for the governor. And nothing better than to have someone in the governor's office watching your back. And he would have been here. But it was really great to have Secretary Gray, because times when I talked to the governor, I'd say, I'm ready to go to court, because that's the way to settle this case. And the governor would say, okay, I'll back off. So I want to pay my respect to Jim Gray, because it was nice to have somebody watching your back in the governor's office. And I want to say thanks to all the people that I had the privilege and opportunity to work with in this wonderful highway department. I wish you'd go to a transportation department. I get mixed up with cabinets anymore. I guess that's getting old. Thanks, Mike.
You're certainly welcome. Thank you. I hope all of you have enjoyed, as I have, this opportunity to hear these folks share some of their thoughts. To each of you, first of all, I want to say thank you for sharing time with us today. And I want to say from the bottom of my heart, for me, you guys are treasures. You're absolute treasures. And the legacy that each of you built and left in place for others to build on has been absolutely incredible. And the good fortune I have with the people in this audience today and the capabilities that many of them still bring to the department that you grew up in, we are still top of the heap, number one. So thank you all for being here. I absolutely appreciate you. All of you who are here, you all contribute to transportation in Kentucky, and you have contributed in many, many ways. And I thank you for taking time out of your day to be with us today. So with that, if you wouldn't mind to give this group one more round of applause.